stress. Oh my God, I can't even name it. It's just so many things that can come behind being unemployed, you know. Nobody wants to be destitute, nobody.
Let's see, I had a brother-in-law that was off for like a couple of years from the unemployment. He was in the trucking industry, and now he's still just working part-time. He's ended up having to move in with his mom, you know, and then you're 40-something years old and you're having to move back in with your parents, that's not a good thing.
Yeah, it was the time that my son, he's 10, and right around Christmas, before we got this, he come to me and he said, "Don't worry about buying me Christmas, Dad." He says, "I think I'm gonna get out and mow lawns this summer," and he says, "You can just start tending to his little sister." He says, "And I think I can take care of me, and that'll make a grown man cry."
Really, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I see this lady crying in the bathroom, crying because she don't know what she's gonna feed her kids for dinner. And the sad part is, you can't say, "Here, this is $20, go and buy something," because you're in the same boat. You have to say everything you got.
To be unemployed in the United States, to lose your identity as a consumer in an economy defined by consumption, is in some way to inhabit another country. In fact, if you count all the people unemployed or underemployed in the US today, you have a population of almost 30 million, a country about the size of Canada. This human crisis is compounded by a political one. Since last year's stimulus package, there has been no major response from the government. On the front lines, frustration is growing, as is a hunger for alternatives. On this episode of Fault Lines, we explore Washington's failure of imagination in dealing with unemployment, and we visit places where creative experiments in job creation are emerging from the grassroots.
Let's get this country working again. And therefore, we will maintain our self-respect, and we'll become that powerful nation that we always was known as being a superpower.
People are scared to death right now. We have members that don't know how they're going to survive one day to the other.
Closing time at the Hugo Boss factory on the west side of Cleveland, Ohio. A trickle of workers coming off shift. Inside, the plant is being emptied out. In a few weeks, the machines will be silenced for good.
So it's kind of somber in there, really. I don't think people know how to react. In some ways, they want to just get on with their lives, and in other ways, they're scared to death because this is it. It's a final chapter in their life.
Today, my last day at work, no more. The layoffs.
There's something like 23 different language groups in the facility. They come from all over the world. They came to the United States in particular with the promise that they were going to enjoy at least the myth of the United States, and they actually believed it to be true at that time. And those folks are incredibly angry with what's happening.
Hugo Boss is a profitable business. Last year, the company paid out $135 million in dividends to shareholders and still made a profit of $140 million more. For the workers, many of whom have worked here for more than 20 years, the decision to close the factory is incomprehensible.
We make profit. That's why we don't understand why they're closing us down. And the only conclusion we can come to is that they just want cheaper labor, and that has just turned into corporate greed. We've just turned into a figure on a piece of paper.
Hugo Boss is owned by a private equity firm called Permira Advisors, based in London, England. While the company declined our request for an interview, it did issue a statement saying that the factory was not globally competitive and that it was acting in the best interests of its shareholders by moving production to Turkey.
If they move, not only do they affect the workers here, they affect all these homeowners' property is going to lose value. You worry about vandalism, and crime rate is going to rocket.
Wanda Navarro has been working at Hugo Boss for 10 years. Every day after work, she goes home to babysit 4 of her grandchildren.
I'll be helping my daughter with my grandkids for a while. I'm the one who pays water, sewer, taxes, insurance, the mortgage. That's good? Can I get some? Thank you. Sometimes I feel like all these questions come to my head. They are going to lose my house. How are we going to survive? They are going to be able to provide for my family. It's hard. Sometimes I just stop thinking. I say, I have to stop thinking because I'm going to go crazy.
For every job opening in the U.S. today, there are 6 people looking for work. The U.S. economy would need to create 10 million new jobs just to get unemployment down to 5%, what it was before the financial meltdown. By any measure, this is a jobs crisis of historic proportions. So what can the Obama administration do? When it came to bailing out banks and auto companies, hundreds of billions of dollars appeared in record time. That kind of effort has not been marshaled to deal with unemployment.
What is the role of government in directly creating jobs in a crisis like this?
Well, I mean, that role is going to be determined by the president and his interaction with Congress, because there's very little that can be done without congressional approval. And I think the American people today are very dissatisfied with what's going on inside the Beltway.
It's not going to be government that's going to get us out of this position. It's going to be the entrepreneur.
The debate about the role of government in the U.S. is an eternal one. It's considered one of the true dividing lines between Democrats and Republicans. But when it comes to governments acting directly to create jobs, neither side wants to go there.
I am an ardent believer in the free market.
I don't believe that it's going to be government that grows jobs. It's going to be the private sector.
I believe businesses like yours are the engines of economic growth in this country.
The person who is going to create a small business that will grow to a medium and then hopefully a large-sized business.
I want your shareholders to do well. I want your workers to do well.
That's what's going to propel our economy.
I want you to do well.
It's going to be those entrepreneurs who are going to hire people one at a time that is going to grow this.
As the political conversation echoes inside its narrow ideological box, in communities on the front lines of the economic crisis, calls are mounting for a bolder response.
We need to have a government program which brings people to work and really helps subsidize that in a very meaningful way. And we can't wait for these global companies and private equity firms to do it, because that's not their interest.
To find a government program that directly pays people to work, you have to go far away from the nation's capital and its limited idea of what's politically possible. We've come to Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Population 50,000, poverty rate more than 30%. In the midst of this battered economy, the Hattiesburg Paper Company is running at full steam. The workforce here is growing, with 2 brand new employees paid for by the government.
Let's find ways of taking this money and giving it to people and companies to get people back to work. It's the right thing to do. It's the right way to start this thing.
The state of Mississippi has launched a program called STEPS. It uses money from Obama's stimulus bill to directly create jobs. Businesses hire new workers, and the government pays the entire salary for the first 2 months, with gradually declining subsidies over the first 6.
To date, we've got a little over 200 employers involved. We've got right at 400 workers involved. So over about a 2.5 month period of time, we've made a tremendous stride toward getting people to work.
There are now 21 states looking to follow Mississippi's lead on direct job creation with public money. It's an approach proving wildly popular, and it's being led by a most unlikely politician.
This administration and this Congress have attempted the biggest lurch to the left of any administration in American history.
Mississippi Governor Haley Barbour started his political career on Richard Nixon's 1968 presidential campaign. He's not exactly known for this kind of economic approach.
This is a deeply Republican state.
Yes, it is.
With a deeply Republican governor.
Yes, he is.
Who's directly spending government money to create jobs.
Yes, he is.
Help me understand this.
Help me understand it.
One obvious explanation is that it's just good politics to create jobs in the middle of the Great Recession. Just ask Scott Phillips. After a medical discharge from the military, he was unemployed for the first time in his life.
I felt like my usefulness had run out, and nobody had any real use for what I had to offer them anymore. And the times that I heard, well, you're overqualified for this job, okay, give me the resume back and I'll take this off and just hand me a broom.
Scott was hired here under the STEPS program. He's a lifelong Republican, but these days he's not complaining about the government interfering in the free market, at least not when talking about STEPS.
I love it. I never wanted anybody to give me anything, but it's given me an opportunity. It's giving the employers a chance to take a chance.
Rashonda Bolton, the other new STEPS employee here, voted enthusiastically for Barack Obama, but she's getting impatient with the political paralysis in Washington.
Sometimes the politicians act like they don't even know what the requirements are. I mean, they just like bickering and Republican against Democrat and conservative, which it should be all about the American people.
If the administration put a very tiny fraction of the money that it put to backstop the banks into a program like the STEPS program on a national level, you could hire millions of people in a matter of months. Why don't you do that?
Well, I think there are people, economists on both sides of the issue, far left economists and far right economists, who would say that it's important that at some time that the American economy stand on its own 2 feet. We're a capitalistic economy and we should let capitalism rule.
We're going to have to set aside, the Democrats think this way, Republicans think this. We're going to have, what does Americans think? What does the public need? What are we going to have to do to get through this?
Call it the post-partisanship of the people. An impatience for government to step in on behalf of the majority. A willingness to lay down political arms and pick up whatever tools can be found.
Alternatives are possible. And the more we can show that alternatives are possible, that the seeds of the future are embedded in our experiment, then we have life. And then we have a future. And that's the hard part.
Construction projects, local labor is employed, and wherever possible, the raw materials are obtained from quarries in the immediate vicinity. How big is the WPA road program? In its first 18 months of operation, the mileage end to end would have stretched 5 times around the earth.
In the 1930s, the United States responded to economic crisis with massive government programs that put people to work. One of the earliest was Franklin Roosevelt's Civil Works Administration. It was launched November 8, 1933. By January, it had created some 4 million jobs, building the infrastructure of modern American capitalism.
The welfare of the community served by a new construction project is always the first consideration, and plans are laid not only for the present, but for the more demanding future.
Watching the old newsreels, you can see that something else was being created, along with the roads and bridges. Community. The promise of a better future through collective effort.
For many years to come.
Today, the United States is facing economic crisis as a nation of isolated consumers, in which almost 30 million people have fallen out of full-time work, fallen out of the consumer class.
Consumption displaces production. When you're actually engaged in production, and you're working together collectively, there is a real sense of something bigger than you. There's a real sense of process, of connectedness. Consumption, by definition, is an isolated individual activity.
On the west side of Cleveland, Ohio, a community's connectedness is being shattered. A Hugo Boss textile factory is closing. 375 workers and their families cast adrift thanks to a decision made by a far-off private equity firm. Over on the east side of the city, another group of people is coming together for one of the country's most innovative economic experiments. A cluster of new companies is opening, based on a completely different business model. For one thing, they're owned locally, very locally. They're owned by their workers.
I own this job, and this is my truck.
Jonathan Rogers is a worker owner at the Ohio Solar Cooperative. When not installing solar panels, he and his colleagues weatherize houses. They make a modest but living wage and are building equity in their company at the same time.
It's about ownership. It's about being able to say that I make decisions here. I make policy, which is good. And I think we're going back to a simpler time, just like the 20s or the 30s when the workers did know best.
He's also
Ted Howard is one of the leading voices in this creative approach that is becoming known as the Cleveland model.
Other people involved.
Well, I see worker ownership both as a way to recover the value of work in America and the dignity of the American worker, but also as a way to recover ourselves as active democratic citizens. And one of the virtues of worker ownership is it's a democratic form.
The Evergreen Cooperative Laundry launched just a few months ago, a state-of-the-art facility that can handle more than 4.5 million kilos of laundry a year from local hospitals and nursing homes. It is a truly green business, using far less water and energy than the industry standard. At capacity, it will employ 50 worker owners. So what makes a worker owner different from a regular worker?
They'll sit on the board and make decisions like any other board, any Fortune 500 company. They'll sit on the board, make decisions about, whether to give raises, new hires, fire, where we should spend more money at on maybe equipment or, what have you, just the everyday operation.
We have a lot of independence. Nobody's really hovering over us. We basically know that when it comes out the dryers and hit the bags, that we have a certain amount of time to get it out, and we really do it together.
The workers supply the labor, but the capital for the Evergreen Co-ops came from the city government, loans from local banks, and from the Cleveland Foundation, a public charity that is one of America's oldest.
As someone that's been working in community development over 20 years, this is the first time I feel like that we're on the cutting edge of really creating a hope for people, of really giving people something that we're not handing out, but making them part of the process and giving them a voice in what happens.
Cleveland's University Circle, where the cooperatives are taking root, is a classic case of America's contradictions. The clients for the laundry and other businesses are found here, a gleaming center of so-called anchor institutions, universities and hospitals that are booming despite the recession. These facilities spend $3 billion a year in goods and services, though little stays in the local economy. And that local economy is desperate. Surrounding this bubble of economic activity are neighborhoods that have suffered decades of disinvestment. 30 years ago, these were solid African-American middle-class communities. Today, the median income hovers around the poverty line.
Everybody out here is unemployed. We all good brothers, you can tell. You know what I'm saying? We got families, fathers, mothers, all that. But unfortunately, due to the statistics, we can't win.
What are the factors that prevent you from getting work?
1, we black. 2, most of us got felonies. 3, don't nobody want to hire nobody. They already stereotype.
The Cleveland model takes advantage of the built-in market of the big institutions, doing laundry for the hospitals, installing solar panels on the shiny buildings. Unlike Hugo Boss, these employers aren't going anywhere. And the worker owners are all hired from the local neighborhoods. As they gain equity in their companies over time, they're not just collecting salaries, but building wealth and a future.
It's a brilliant plan right there, because the person is working towards something that he could call his very own. And a lot of times we work places and everything, and it's like we study making somebody else rich, but we breaking our back doing it. you know, then in the long run, what do we really have to show for it?
We can keep those companies here in America and make them more profitable, and then we won't have 400 or 500 people losing their jobs every other day because the company can pull up and move.
Worker cooperatives are not new. They've been around in the U.S. since the 19th century. But in the midst of this unemployment crisis, the prospect of democratic workplaces rooted in communities is gaining new fans.
Good job, good job.
And they are eager to take it to scale.
As we create 1 business, 2 business, 3, we hope to create 50 businesses in this city and to stabilize the communities and then stretch this out that it becomes a model not only in Ohio, but in other cities across the nation.
I think it's a great idea to just get together and start cooperatives everywhere. Who needs a boss?
Totally agree.
Yeah. You ought to be in pictures.
Yeah, that's me.
The excitement around this experiment in Cleveland is contagious. But at the moment, it's no systemic solution to unemployment in the U.S. In the short term, the evergreen co-ops will generate a few hundred jobs at best.
Ultimately, what we're going to require is a kind of massive investment, the sort of investment the country's made in the past but hasn't made recently, targeted at job creation and wealth building in our cities to put our people back to work.
The President of the United States, Barack Obama.
For his part, Barack Obama has shown no interest in transformative change of that kind. In fact, there are signs that the White House is hoping that the economy will rebound and put people back to work without another intervention from the government.
We learned that the economy actually produced a substantial number of jobs instead of losing a substantial number of jobs. We are beginning to turn the corner.
But the new jobs in that monthly report were barely enough to absorb the new people entering the labor market. The unemployment rate hasn't budged. It's expected to remain high for years to come. And that's why Cleveland's cooperators say that they are in it for the long haul. They're well aware that the greatest power of their experiment is that it could rekindle a sense of possibility and the collective spirit required for meaningful change.
You know, the price of making a difference in this process is you have to put decades of your life on the table. You know, this is 10, 20, 30-year process of rebuilding America's communities. At the end of the day, what that's going to mean is we're going to need to rebuild and change the politics of the country.
It's hard for people to envision what they believe to be impossible. We need to begin to blow open the walls that are binding us and the walls that are holding us back. We need to be able to construct realities that people can see, that they can taste and touch, that show that things are possible in this country.
Since Barack Obama was elected, the country has been waiting for him to lead on creating jobs. For supporters of the Cleveland model, all they want him to do is follow.